Hi, everyone. This is Elizabeth, and today we're going to be doing an interview with Dimitrios, who is one of our published papers in Dialexicon this year. And we'll be talking with him about his paper itself, his interest in philosophy, all sorts of things. So, yeah, before we get into the meat of this interview, Jeff, would you have any other opening remarks or?
No, other than congratulations to Dimitrios. We really enjoyed reading his paper, and our committee of esteemed readers also really enjoyed reading his paper throughout. So Elizabeth and I are just super excited, Dimitrios, to talk to you today, as is our audience, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, without any further ado, I think maybe the first question that's at the top of our minds is, what have you been up to in quarantine? Have you been watching any shows, reading any books that you'd like to mention or bring up, thinking about any philosophical ideas? Just a free-for-all question, very open-ended. Just feel free to add any interest that you've been doing or up to.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, first of all. Yeah, I think that the quarantine has been a very peculiar situation for all of us. But yeah, I have been doing some stuff. Most of them, I would do them when it comes to my everyday life in general. I study a lot and I like to read books, a lot of books. And something new that I have begun doing is listening to music, which I didn't used to listen to music a lot, but now have begun to appreciate it. And another thing also is that I have reconnected with drawing and painting. It's also something that I would do as a little boy, but now, during those years at school and with all the work that came around, I didn't have the time. And I think that quarantine gave me a great opportunity to reconnect with that. And when it comes to the book stuff, because I really like them, I would like to mention one book in particular. It doesn't have to do with philosophy. It's not a complex book about these notions, etc. It's a very simple book. It's actually a book for children. It's called Wonder, and there was a film a few years ago that's related to it. It is about a boy who has a condition that has a great impact on his looks. So his face is not an ordinary face, and this causes him some problems when he goes to school. And the reason I think is important because it exalts the differences between people and the special needs that every person has, and we should attend to. And it's also personal because I got it again a few years ago. But at first I snubbed it. I didn't like how it looked, the book, and they said, oh, no, maybe for later. And here now in quarantine, I remember that there was a book and I read it, and it was one of the very few books that actually made me cry, and it was very emotional and moving. So I think it's really important. It improved me as a person. So it's exactly what a book is supposed to do. So I'd like to mention that.
Wow. We have this. I love that you included books, music, painting and drawing. I noticed a lot of analog, not necessarily digital things in this age where so many things have moved onto, with social media and digital connectivity, just taking the time to flip open. And I can see there's plenty of books behind you as well. Are there any, speaking about books, are there any particular philosophers or literary inspirations that you've enjoyed?
When it comes to philosophy, I have up to now I have focused more on the classics. So when it comes to Aristotle and Kant and utilitarianism, so I don't know many things about contemporary philosophers, and I haven't read whole books about them. I really like the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals of Kant, even though I don't agree with many of his ideas. I like the structure and that completely rational order when it comes to how he structures his argument and that flow throughout the whole work. So I really appreciated that. And another book, which it doesn't come from a philosopher, but I think there's a lot of philosophy in it, is After Many a Summer of Aldous Huxley, a book that talks a lot about human vanity and wealth and how a person tries to reverse aging when that is actually not possible, and how we lose the essence in many things. And I think that's a deeply philosophical book that had me thinking after I read it.
Wow, Kant and Huxley. I have to admit, Kant is a bit of a dense read for me. As I find it's a hard philosopher to read. On that subject of just philosophy, I'm curious as to what made you interested in philosophy in the first place. Like, why do you like philosophy as much as you clearly do?
Yeah, it's an interesting story actually, because let's say 2 years ago, all I knew about philosophy was Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. Just their names. That there were some people living in ancient times, and that was it. But there was a teacher at school when I was at the first grade of Lyceum who told me about the national competition of philosophy essay. And since I have been doing some debating with that professor, she asked me whether I would like to participate. So I said, why not? Let's try that. And after that, I actually got addicted to philosophy, and it became an occupation to me. So that's exactly how I got into it.
Wow. Yeah, and essay writing is it's interesting to hear about your experience getting into philosophy with essay writing, because for me it was also through an essay contest, the Aristotle in Canada, that I got interested in philosophy. And so what specifically about essay writing do you think, or just writing about philosophy in general, is so important, especially perhaps for younger generations, or for yourself in terms of, do you think the writing process helps maybe hone your thought process?
I think that you get quite a lot of benefits, because first of all, you have to organize your ideas, and you have to be very specific in what you say. And this is actually important because we have many ideas, let's say, when we brainstorm, but we are not always able to put them in order, or some of them are very vague and they cannot be understood. So I really think that it's important to make the other person, to help the other person, the reader, for example, understand what exactly you are saying. So you have to define the notions that are involved in your writing. And I think that this process of defining and arguing about what exactly you have to say so that you can get it across to your audience is very important, especially for young people, because we're living in an age where communication is very important when it comes to jobs, when it comes to everything. So good writing is, I think, the foundation of all that.
Wow. Yeah. It's very elegantly put, and couldn't agree more. I think what we're trying to do at Dialexicon is exactly what you said, which is to encourage more young people like yourself to think more critically about the news and things within the news, as well as be able to express that in a logical and coherent way. And speaking of the news, and this is kind of treading on your topic a bit, and Jeff, feel free to carry this over, but clearly your topic was about COVID-19, which is this global pandemic we're in right now. What drew you initially to that topic? Was there sort of this brainstorming or thought process behind it? Maybe take us through that a bit.
Yeah, it was actually, I thought of it as a challenge, because when it comes to political philosophy, I hadn't actually delved into it a lot before that. I was actually scared a bit because I related it to politics in modern day, in the modern world, which of course is a very different story. They are related indeed, but politics in practice is one thing, and political philosophy is another. It has to do more with the justification. So I couldn't actually make the understand the difference. So I said, okay, let's focus on other things. But now, because there was this experience, the immediate experience that of our everyday lives when it comes to COVID, I think that this was exactly what drew me to that topic. And because there were many concerns by my friends, by my teacher, by the population in general, about what's going on, that insecurity, we feel unfree, we feel constrained, and we cannot manage it probably. So I think that's what urged me to write on that.
Great. Yeah, and I think this segues pretty well into our next segment, which is about your paper in specific. So yeah, Jeff, if you want to ask Dimitrios questions specifically about his paper, I'd love
Yeah,
to.
do I ever? So I have to admit, I'm really excited to talk to you, Dimitrios, because I've read your paper now several times over the course of many months. It's nice reading something and then, you know, sitting back for a few months, absorbing, and then coming back to it. And as I said, I've had the pleasure of reading it now multiple times. Your paper is titled COVID-19, A Lesson of Freedom, very important aspect in your paper, and citizenship, freedom and citizenship. These two concepts, notions, terms are prominently featured in your paper. And I really can't wait to ask you about them. And so like a good philosopher, you don't focus in on, you know, the empirical or sociological data. Not that that's not important. It's just that that's for statisticians and sociologists. Instead, you focus kind of more at the 10,000 foot level, right? And try to survey the landscape. And you determine that there's this one concept that's really important in your paper. And that's this concept of freedom, that is. And so you discuss freedom in the context of Kant as it pertains to individuals, right? But you quickly acknowledge, and I'm going to quote you to yourself here. On the political level, however, freedom should be redefined because people are not only individuals, but also citizens, equal members of the political society. So I'd love for you to say more about this notion of kind of freedom as it pertains to individuals, but then also individuals now in the context of a society, making them citizens. And how is that different? Please, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question, actually, and this is one of my center points when it comes to the essay. Yeah, of course, when we ask the question, are we free? What comes to mind first has to do more with our rational capacity. And this is actually a question that also relates to metaphysics and how scientifically we can prove or not whether we are free. But I think that the most important thing when it comes to that individual aspect of freedom is that we understand ourselves, we live our lives believing that we are free. And I think that that is the crux of what Kant says, that even though we may not be able to prove in a mathematical sense that, yeah, we're free, we live in that way. All of the decisions that we make, all of our choices, all of our emotions, everything in our lives lie inside that context of freedom, individual freedom. And so that's exactly why I began my essay with examining freedom on the individual level. But then I think we should go one step further and look at society, because what matters there is not the person, but the person in relation to other people. So I think that the only practical way and also theoretical way we can define freedom on the political level is in that relational framework, because if a person is free and the other has to, if a person is free, then they have to also to recognize that the other persons as human beings are also free. And if nobody respects the freedom of everybody else, then actually the very notion of freedom becomes self-defeating. How am I free if a person can kill me in an instant at any time? So freedom, when it comes to society, has to be, let's say, viewed as a relation, as a notion that corresponds to the relations between citizens and has to do with their duties as well as their rights. It has to do with exactly what I can do, but when that will transgress the freedom of another person. And that's actually, for example, the concept of Mill's freedom on liberty. I am free insofar as my freedom doesn't transgress and doesn't harm other people. So in that sense, I believe that freedom on the political level is something different.
Yeah, a brilliant answer. I really enjoyed listening to that. Elizabeth will know I just gave a talk last week and brought up kind of a similar idea that you kind of introduce here, which is that sometimes giving up a little bit of freedom up front actually in the long run gets you more freedom, right? And it's also interesting that you don't even need another citizen or another person to trespass on your freedom, right, in order to lose some of your own freedom. In fact, if you have unfettered freedom, you become a slave even of your own hedonistic desires, right? We restrict our own freedom all the time with drugs and health, diet, sleep regulation, et cetera, right? And this doesn't involve anyone else other than ourselves, right? So even our own freedom can sometimes be overwhelming as it pertains to individuals. Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of your paper. And now you recognize though that, and you anticipate an objection, which I think was a really, it was an important aspect of the requirements for the journal. And I think that you really anticipate exactly what is the crucial problem with this view, which is that what happens when, okay, we understand that we don't want citizens to be totally free because then there's no such thing as citizenship. Okay, we understand. But then there's the other side to the coin, right? And the other side, and I think you know where I'm going with this, which is that if we restrict freedom too much, right, then we make the citizens primed for a totalitarian state to come in and impose some type of Orwellian nightmare on them, right, where they make the citizens subservient and docile. And so we don't want to take too much freedom away from the citizens, because then some Stalin, Mao, Hitler could come along and really take advantage of them. And so how do we mitigate the chances of something like that happening?
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to that, it is very important, let's say for the citizens, let's be realistic, to understand what the laws of their countries are and whether they are in fact democratic, because my essay was focused on democratic societies. Now, the particularity, I think, of democratic countries and democratic constitution is that the law itself allows some margin for its amendment and for its change if that is necessary in order to protect people's freedom. In a democracy, for example, if there is a law that is considered restrictive, let's say it comes from an old era, for example, that doesn't relate to the standards of the 21st century. Through those processes, for example, elections, voting for the representatives of the country, and the empowerment can decide in order to change it and in order to progress. So I think that's a basic prerequisite, if I may call it like that, in order to safeguard the fundamental freedoms of people. Because, for example, the law of a dictatorship has nothing to do with that, and as such, it should not be respected in the same way. It actually shouldn't be respected at all. People should fight against that. But in democracies, I believe that this system of law, when the law can be amended to the circumstances, is very crucial. And also, everybody should understand that they can air their opinions, they can participate, and they should not leave themselves in a position where they are absent from this political life, because that's something that most people do, especially when it comes to normal circumstances. And that's exactly my focus here, because now we have somehow been forced to take a stand and to form an opinion on all that. And even though it's unintuitive, completely unintuitive, let's say now, if we stay, let's say, inside, or if we walk one at a time, two people at a time, generally abide by these measures, we as citizens are the ones that will determine the outcome of the pandemic. If the citizens themselves do not understand that this is their duty and this will help both them and their country, then no government can impose any measures because they will not be respected. So the outcome, the positive outcome, will be our, let's say, victory. So even though it's unintuitive, citizens, although in such a passive way, we can play a crucial role in the course of our country's economy and have a great effect.
Another fantastic answer. You're just knocking each of these things out of the park. And just to build on that answer, actually, in your paper, you bring up a great analogy or example, which is that during the pandemic, governments have imposed all kinds of restrictions on our freedom. For instance, the number of people at a gathering, mask wearing, etc. However, one that they have not imposed was the right to vote, right? So that was never really a question. And you mentioned that in the paper, right? Where it was never really on the table whether or not there's just not going to be an election this year. We're going to postpone the election in perpetuity at a time when we feel comfortable. That was really never a discussion in a democratic society, right? It's like this election's going to happen with precautions, but it's going to go forward, right? And you made that point in the paper, which I thought was just a terrific emphasis. So just one more question for you, Dimitrios. I'm really enjoying this, by the way. I want to talk about science and objectivity, because you bring this up in your paper. Once again, I when I look at you, I feel like you know where I'm going with all of these questions. So you just need to give me one moment to find it here. This is the part where we just cut out. Okay, here it is. All right, ready? And we're going to go back. 3, 2, 1. So you say here, Dimitrios, let me read you back to yourself. Thus, in this case, we're talking about objectivity in science. Thus, in this case, it is scientists that can ensure that no unnecessary measures are imposed, for they have the knowledge and tools, the scientists, to estimate the effectiveness of each action against the virus and the danger it poses in each case. And here's the crucial sentence. Science is objective, contrary to politics, as it concerns the unbiased analysis of data. And so, of course, there's this, the question here is that I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Science can be done objectively, let's say, but can the results of science be disseminated objectively? That is to say, science can be done objectively in the lab, but can its results ever be communicated to the public without it becoming politicized? Because we've seen our society struggle with that over the past year, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's indeed a great issue when it comes to how science works, because we have to understand that actually science is objective. That doesn't mean that it's, let's say, guarantee of absolute truth. Even throughout the pandemic, science actually has moved forward, but sometimes it has shown that we could readjust past measures, we can make improvements. So it's actually the best way to postulate that is science is the most objective, let's say, thing, the most objective procedure of analysis that we as humanity possess. Now, when it comes to how it can be communicated to the people, of course, it's a great issue, and I think that it gets politicized, and it will get politicized because it's exactly the government that assumes those measures as well as the responsibility for them. So I think that the best thing to do is for people actually to make the difference and say, for example, that those specialists have proposed those measures, and so those measures are supposed to work, or is actually the best alternative that we have discovered yet. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Tomorrow it may be proven that some of the measures that have been taken in the past are not the most effective. But that's not a way of thinking, because otherwise we are led to a dead end. What are we going to do? So we have to trust science because it's the most objective procedure that we have, and then differentiate that from the politicians who actually apply those measures. We should criticize them, of course, but we should not, let's say, doubt on the effectiveness of the measures because they are implied, for example, by politicians that we do not admire or do not agree with. So that's two different things, and I think that citizens should understand, everybody should understand that.
As always, really, really well put. Dimitrios. So that concludes my questions, and I've been dying to ask them now for probably 2 months, 3 months now. Elizabeth, do you have any other questions for our guest?
Yeah, yeah, it was a pleasure to listen to. I've also had the fortune to read your paper several times now, and it I really, really enjoyed it. Especially I think the way you write is extremely clear as well. It's clear without being overly, because I think one issue that maybe a lot of younger writers run into, and myself for a while, was not being concise enough, sort of rambling on and on about all these whatever ideas, and that wasn't an issue at all in your paper. It was very, very good, so thank you. One question I had was, actually, I remember you may have come to one of our logic tutorials, one that Jeff ran. How did you like that? And was that sort of your initial exposure to formal logic, or had you already been familiar with some of the ideas in formal logic from individual reading on your own?
Yeah, I think it was a great experience. It was actually very important to me. And when it comes to finding what the actual requirements are some strategies. For example, that's the first time I learned about the terms to straw manning. Straw, is that right? I think that's right. Yeah. And I think it was very helpful to me. When it comes to this realm of logic and philosophy, I had done a few things. I have read very few things last year when I was preparing for the International Philosophy Olympiad. But other than that, I didn't do many things. And I remember, because it was kind of funny, that I was the last person, because I wanted to ask a question. And I was the last person in the room. And I couldn't leave the room because my computer had somehow lagged. And you were both waiting for me to log off and leave. And this was funny.
No, I remember that as well. But yeah, I remember you also asked a really interesting question. So you were glad that you stayed. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to open the floor to you as well, just to clearly we probably weren't able to cover a lot of potentially other things that you might wanted to say or let our viewers know about. But was there anything else you wanted to comment about? The whole process, maybe what you enjoyed about writing your essay in particular, potentially future aspirations in terms of career or in philosophy. Yeah, feel free to just essentially say whatever you want about the process and philosophy in general.
Yeah, I think it was great for me. First of all, it was the first time I had to write an essay, and I had to cite my sources and references. So I didn't know how to do that beforehand, and I was actually experimenting with my teacher. Well, now indeed in text citation, what date should I use? What should I put that? Should I put that? Should I write it this way or another? And I think that besides fact that it was a bit tiresome, it was a way to learn about how to write these type of essays. And I thank you for that personally. I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for you. And in general, I think it was a great actually incentive to get me into political philosophy. And in general, because before actually beginning to write the paper, what I do is actually taking notes and thoughts, jotted down thoughts on many different subjects. I mean, on a broader scale, and then I actually select it. So I think that it gave me a great understanding of exactly what's happening around us, and it helped me to interpret better events that are happening, like what happened in the capital and all this stuff. I think it's very important for people in general to engage in philosophy, because that will change the way they view the world, they view the reality they live in. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that it was actually a big fight with words, with the word count. I was actually 1,199 words, let's say, and I was like trying to compress that into that. And I think it's also a nice way to learn how to write in a condensed but clear manner.
Dimitrios, thank you very much for submitting, and not only submitting, but having that paper published in our journal. We're thrilled to have you. And once again, for our viewers, that is COVID-19, a lesson of freedom and citizenship in the Dialexicon Journal 2020. Dimitrios, thank you so much. Hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Thank you very much. It was a great opportunity for me. Thank you
Great.
for having me.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Until next
Bye.
time. Bye.